Welcome to online classroom of Heritage Public School. Class 8. The subject we are going to study today is English literature. And today we will be reading chapter 1 of English. Let's begin our class. Chapter 1. The name of the chapter is The Best Christmas Present in the World by Michael Morpurgo. Let's read about the author. Morpurgo was born in 1943 in St Albans, Sir Hertfordshire. Michael Andrew Bridge Morpurgo was born on 5th of October 1943, is a British writer. Michael Morpurgo grew up in London during a war there. He was a teacher, but the book Poetry in the Making by Ted Hughes made him decide to write instead of teaching. He is the author of over 100 books, mostly for children, many of which have given many prizes and awards. 5 of his books have been made into films. My Friend Walter in 1988 and Out of the Ashes in 2001 have both been made into television. So here you can see the picture of Michael. Let's begin our reading session. Before we read, there are some important dates or periods of time in the history of the world that are so significant that everyone knows and remembers them. The story you will read mentions one such date and event, a war between the British and the Germans in 1914. Can you guess which war it is? Do you know which events the dates below refer to? Let's read it and figure it out. The first date is 4th of July 1776. It was the date on which American Declaration of Independence occurred. Next is 17th of December 1903. On this date, Wilbur and Orville Wright made the first flight, remaining in the air for 12 seconds and covering 120 feet. Next is 6th of August 1945. This was Hiroshima Day. An atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in Japan on this day. Next is 30th January 1948. This was the date when Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated. Next is 12th of April 1961. On this date, Yuri A. Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. Last one is 20th of July 1969. On this date, Neil Armstrong became the first human to set foot on the moon. So here we recalled some important dates that everyone knows and remembers. And in this chapter we will read about the British and the German war in 1914. Let's read the context. I spotted it in a junk shop in Bridport, a roll-top desk. The man said it was early 19th century and oak. I had wanted one, but they were far too expensive. This one was in bad condition. The roll-top in several pieces, one leg clumsily mended, scorch marks all down one side. It was going for very little money. I thought I could restore it. It would be a risk, a challenge, but I had to have it. I paid the man and brought it back to my workroom at the back of the garage. I began to work on it on Christmas Eve. I removed the roll top completely and pulled out the drawers. The veneer had lifted almost everywhere. It looked like water damage to me. Both fire and water had clearly taken their toll on this desk. The last drawer was stuck fast. I tried all I could to ease it out gently. In the end, I used brute force. I struck it sharply with the side of my fist, and the drawer flew open to reveal a shallow space underneath, a secret drawer. There was something in there. I reached in and took out a small black tin box. Sellotaped to the top of it was a piece of lined notepaper, and written on it in shaky handwriting, Jim's last letter, received January 25, 1915, to be buried with me when the time comes. I knew as I did it was wrong of me to open the box, but curiosity got the better of my scruples. It usually does. Inside the box there was an envelope. The address read Mrs. Jem Macpherson, 12 Coppers Beaches, Bridport, Dorset. I took out the letter and unfolded it. It was written in pencil and dated at the top, December 26, 1914. Now let's try to understand the two paragraphs we have just read. So, the author found a roll top desk in a junk shop. Students, what is a roll top desk? It is a table having upper part revolving, and he found it in a junk shop. It was in very bad condition as it was very old. It was of 19th century and it was made of oak. But he thought that if he buys it, he could restore it. So he bought it. He began to work on the table on the roll top desk on Christmas Eve on his garage. At his garage. So he pulled out the drawers. He found that this had been badly damaged and by fire and by water. The man who sold it had told him that it was very old. It was of 19th century. So the last drawer had stuck fast. He had to use much force to open it. When it opened, it revealed a secret space. In it, what did the author find? He found a small tin box. On top of the box, some words were written. The words that were written was Jim's last letter received January 25, 1950, to be buried with me when the time comes. Inside there was an envelope with the address Mrs. Jim Macpherson, 12 Copper Beaches, Bridport. And the date was December 26, 1914. So here, now we are going to read about the letter that he writes to his wife. Let's read. Dearest Connie, I write to you in a much happier frame of mind because something wonderful has just happened that I must tell you about at once. We were all standing in our trenches yesterday morning, Christmas morning. It was crisp and quiet all about. As beautiful a morning as I've ever seen, as cold and frosty as a Christmas morning should be. I should like to be able to tell you that we began it. But the truth is, I'm ashamed to say, is that Fritz began it. First, someone saw a white flag waving from the trenches opposite. Then they were calling out to us from across no man's land, Happy Christmas, Tommy, Happy Christmas. When we had got over the surprise, some of us shouted back, Same to you, Fritz, same to you. I thought that would be that. We all did. But then, suddenly one of them was up there in his grey greatcoat and waving a white flag. Don't shoot, lads, someone shouted, and no one did. Then there was another Fritz up on the parapet and another. Keep your heads down, I told the men. It's a trick. But it wasn't. One of the Germans was waving a bottle above his head. It is Christmas Day, Tommy. We have schnapps. We have sausage. We meet you, yes. By this time, there were dozens of them walking towards us across no man's land, not a rifle between them. Little Private Morris was the first up. Come on, boys, what are we waiting for? And then there was no stopping them. I was the officer. I should have stopped them there and then, I suppose, but the truth is that it never even occurred to me I should. So, students, here is the letter that author finds and tries to read. So the author read the letter and author thought that the owner of the desk must have put the letter into the drawer. The letter had been written by a captain of the English army. His name was Jim Macpherson. He had written it to his wife, Connie Macpherson. A wonderful incident had happened on the battlefield on the Christmas day. Jim Macpherson had narrated the incident in the letter. Let's read it out. So, in the incident, there were some unforgettable moments. The English and Germans were at war. The two armies stood in their respective trenches. On the two sides of the no man's land, suddenly Macpherson saw someone waving a white flag from the enemy side. Then he saw many German soldiers calling out to them. They were wishing them Happy Christmas, Tommy. Some English soldier shouted back, Same to you. The English army thought that was all. To their surprise, they saw many Germans moving towards them. The captain was alarmed. Who was the captain? Jim Macpherson was the captain. He was alarmed. He thought that it could be a trick, but it was not any trick. They were bringing with them German wine and canned meat. So the German wine here is schnapps and sausage is the canned meat that the Germans were bringing. Now there were no rifles between the soldiers. Everyone was seeing the Germans coming towards them. Let's read further. All along their line and ours, I could see men walking slowly towards one another. Grey coats, khaki coats meeting in the middle, and I was one of them. I was part of this. In the middle of the war, we were making peace. You cannot imagine, dearest Connie, my feelings as I looked into the eyes of Fritz officer, who approached me, hand outstretched. Hans Wolf, he said, gripping my hand warmly and holding it. I am from Dusseldorf. I play the cello in the orchestra. Happy Christmas. Captain Jim Macpherson, I replied, and a happy Christmas to you too. I'm a school teacher from Dorset in the west of England. Ah, Dorset, he smiled. I know this place. I know it very well. We shared my rum ration and his excellent sausage. And we talked, Connie, how we talked. He spoke almost perfect English, but it turned out that he had never set foot in Dorset, never ever been to England. He had learnt all he knew of England from school and from reading books in English. His favourite writer was Thomas Hardy, his favourite book Far from the Madding Crowd. So out there in no man's land we talked of Bathsheba and Gabriel Oak and Sergeant Roy and Dorset. He had a wife and one son, born just 6 months ago. As I looked about me, there were huddles of khaki and grey everywhere, all over no man's land, smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, eating. Hans Wolf and I shared what was left of your wonderful Christmas cake, Connie. He thought of the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. I agreed, we agreed about everything, and he was my enemy. There never was a Christmas party like it, Connie. So we have read these two pages. Now let's understand what happens. So the German officer moved towards Macpherson. They shook their hands warmly. The German officer said that he was from Dusseldorf and that he played cello in the orchestra. And he gave his name as Hans Wolf. In return, Macpherson also introduced himself. He said that he was a school teacher from Dorset. Wolf smiled. He said he knew Dorset. In fact, he had never been to England, but he knew English. His favorite writer was Thomas Hardy, and his favorite book was Far from the Madding Crowd. It was from there he had learned all about Dorset and English. Macpherson shared with Hans Wolf the Christmas cake his wife had sent for him. Hans Wolf said that the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. It was a wonderful Christmas party. Let's read further. Then someone I don't know who brought out a football. Great coats were dumped in piles to make goalposts, and the next thing we knew it was Tommy against Fritz out in the middle of no man's land. Hans Wolf and I looked on and cheered, clapping our hands and stamping our feet to keep out the cold as much as anything. There was a moment when I noticed our breaths mingling in the air between us. He saw it too and smiled. Jem Macpherson, he said after a while, I think this is how we should resolve this war. A football match. No one dies in a football match. No children are orphaned. No wives become widows. I would prefer cricket, I told him. Then we Tommies could be sure of winning, probably. We laughed at that, and together we watched the game. Sad to say, Connie Fritz won 2 goals to 1. But, as Hans Wolf generously said, our goal was wider than theirs, so it wasn't quite fair. The time came, and all too soon, when the game was finished, schnapps and the rum and the sausage had long since run out, and we knew it was all over. I wished Hans well and told him I hoped he would see his family again soon, that the fighting would end and we could all go home. I think that is what every soldier wants on both sides. Hans Wolf said, Take care, Jim Macpherson. I shall never forget this moment, nor you. Now let's try to understand these two pages. So now, what happens next? A soldier from nowhere brought out a football. The soldiers played while Macpherson and Hans Wolf, the German and English officer, clapped and cheered the football match. Hans Wolf suggested that the world would be much better if problems were resolved by a football match instead of war. After the football match, all the drinks, eatables were consumed. Now it was time to part. Hans Wolf saluted Macpherson and walked away. They both wished them well and wished and hoped that they could see their family again soon. As both officers bid goodbye to each other, so the German officer saluted and walked away. Let's read next. He saluted and walked away from me slowly, unwillingly, I felt. He turned to wave just once and then became one of the hundreds of grey coated men drifting back towards their trenches. That night, back in our dugouts, we heard them singing a carol, and singing it quite beautifully. It was still night, silent night. Our boys gave them a rousing chorus of while shepherds watched. We exchanged carols for a while and then we all fell silent. We had had our time of peace and goodwill, a time I will treasure as long as I live. Dearest Connie, by Christmas time next year, this war will be nothing but a distant and terrible memory. I know from all that happened today how much both armies long for peace. We shall be together again soon. I am sure of it. Your loving Jim. So as you can see in this paragraph that Germans were heard singing a carol and English soldiers replied them with a rousing chorus of carol. So they exchanged their carols while for a while and then it was all silence. Macpherson wrote in his letter that he would treasure all those moments that he experienced that night all his life. Macpherson ended the letter hoping that the war would end soon. Both armies longed for peace and he was sure that they would be together again. So here is the third part of the chapter. Let's read the third part of the chapter, and then we will try to summarize it. I folded the letter again and slipped it carefully back into its envelope. I kept all awake all night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove into Bridport, just a few miles away. I asked a boy walking his dog where Copper Beeches was. House number 12 turned out to be nothing but a burned earth shell, the roof gaping, the windows boarded up. I knocked at the house next door and asked if any knew the whereabouts of Mrs. Macpherson. Oh, yes, said the old man in his sleepers. He knew her well. A lovely old lady, he told me, a bit muddle headed, but at her age she was entitled to be, wasn't she? 101 years old, she had been in the house when it caught fire. No one really knew how the fire had started, but it could well have been candles. She used candles rather than electricity because she always thought electricity was too expensive. The fireman had got her out just in time. She was in a nursing home now, told me Burlington House on the Dorchester Road on the other side of the town. I found Burlington House nursing home easily enough. There were paper chains up in the hallway and lighted Christmas tree stood in the corner with a lopsided angel on top. I said I was a friend come to visit Mrs. Macpherson to bring her Christmas present. I could see through into the dining room where everyone was wearing a paper hat and singing. The matron had a hat on too, and seemed happy enough to see me. She even offered me a mince pie. She walked me along the corridor. Mrs. Macpherson is not in with the others, she told me. She's rather confused today, so we thought it best if she had a good rest. She has no family, you know, no one visits. So I'm sure she'll be only too pleased to see you. She took me into conservatory with wicker chairs and potted plants all around, left me. The old lady was sitting in a wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap. She had silver white hair pinned into a wispy bun. She was gazing out at the garden. Hello, I said. She turned and looked up at me vacantly. Happy Christmas, Connie, I went on. I found this. I think it's yours. As I was speaking, her eyes never left my face. I opened the tin box and gave it to her. That was the moment her eyes lit up and with recognition, and her face became suffused with a sudden glow of happiness. I explained about the desk, about how I had found it, but I don't think she was listening. For a while she said nothing, but stroked the letter tenderly with her fingertips. Suddenly she reached out and took my hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. You told me you'd come home by Christmas, dearest, she said. And here you are, the best Christmas present in the world. Come closer, Jim. Dear, sit down. I sat down beside her. She kissed my cheek. I read your letter. So often, Jim, every day. I wanted to hear your voice in my head. It was always made me feel you were with me. And now you are. Now you're back. You can read it to me yourself. Would you do that for me, Jim dear? I just want to hear your voice again. I'd love that so much, and then perhaps we all will have some tea. I've made you a nice Christmas cake, marzipan, all around. I know how much you love marzipan. Michael Morpurgo. So let's try to understand the third part of the chapter. Having read the letter, the author put it back in the envelope and he decided to give the letter to Mrs. Connie Macpherson, the wife of Jim Macpherson. So he drove to that place and he searched for Mrs. Macpherson and her house, and he found that her house caught fire and firemen had got her out just in time. She was 101 years old, and he found Mrs. Macpherson. She was in a nursing home, and he met the matron. She told the author that Mrs. Macpherson was rather confused that day. They had put her in a conservatory. The author found Mrs. Macpherson sitting in a chair. Naturally, she looked up at the author vacantly, but her eyes lit up when he called her Connie and gave her the letter. He told her how he had got the letter, but she was not listening to him. She reached out and took his hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. She felt that her Jim had returned. She said that her Jim had kept his promise. He had returned on the eve of Christmas. She made him sit beside her. She kissed his cheek. She talked long and lovingly to him, said that she had got the best Christmas present in the world. So here is the chapter by Michael Morpurgo, and we have finished our reading. Thanks for watching the video. Stay home, stay safe.